Well, I'm just going to go ahead and get started so that we can get through the opening slides. I'm Cheryl Larson with Midwest Business Group on Health. This is our, I think, third in a series of cell and gene therapy webinars where we're bringing leaders to the table with employers to respond and share their story. We are still in the early stages of this whole area, although I feel like we've been talking about it at MBGH for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. But we are excited that we're starting to drill down on things that employers can really better understand and potentially do something about. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide. Next slide. Those of you who may not know who we are, we're one of the oldest and largest employer coalitions in the country. And if you haven't been at one of our events, they're very informative and a little fun. So thanks for being part of today. Next slide. We have already scheduled almost all of our events for 2026. Our employer-only event in January will be on digital innovation. On February, we're doing an employer-only program on employer strategies on direct-to-employer provider contracting. That is an area we have never covered. Again, employer-only, but we hope to see you there. March 11th is Mental Strength at Work. That's our mental health program. And then on June 24th, we already have our employer forum on pharmacy benefits, specialty drugs, and CGTs, balancing innovation and affordability in the new era of CGT therapies. We also have our September program. I don't have it listed here because I didn't have a date, but that's going to be on transparency, data analytics, and the challenges of getting your data, fiduciary, and fraud, waste, and abuse. It's all about transparency. Next slide. Hey, make sure to save the date for our big 46th annual conference. You can see our theme. We're not fooling around this year or next year. And make sure to get it on your calendar. Next slide. Just a few reminders, housekeeping items for today. If you have questions of the speakers, use the Q&A function, and Tom, my moderator, and myself will be monitoring that. If you want to talk to anybody else, use the chat function, or if you're having any problems, technical problems. We will send you the PowerPoint slides after today's meeting, and at the very end, I will have a very brief survey, and I really would appreciate it if you would spend a few minutes completing it. Next slide. Now, you know we love to share survey results, and for the last month, we've had out the results of the 2025 Employer Health Benefit Trends and Priorities. This is a National Alliance of Healthcare Purchaser Coalition survey that we have piggybacked onto so that we would have a larger group of employers and their data. What the data you'll see today is specific to MBGH employers. We had about 350 employers in total complete this and about 65 MBGH members. I just want to point out this pie chart on the left, employer strategic approaches to health benefits management. 35% of our members tell us they're early adopters. Granted, 23% follow the leader. They want to know what the other employers are doing and learn from them. And 19% are catalysts for change. So we've got a really good cross-section of different types of employers and what they're doing. Excuse me. Next slide. In terms of PBM strategies they're employing, I included a handful of slides that were specific to cell and gene therapy. So let's read this section at the bottom. Other things being considered: complete transparency regarding net ingredient costs by drug inclusion of cell and gene therapies and all drugs in general, and full disclosure of revenue streams. Next slide. We also always ask our employer members, what are you doing to mitigate high cost claims? Look at the item on the far right. 49% of you are purchasing stop loss coverage for high cost claims. Now, that model is going to likely change because we won't be able to be purchasing for these really, really high cost cell and gene therapies at a stop loss level, but there's a lot of different models out there. Next slide. And then finally, I'm going to introduce our moderator, as soon as I can close my window to get to your, well, I guess I could just say Tom Sondergeld has been a chair of the MBGH board. He has been on our board for many, many years. Today, he serves as a consultant for us for this project, which we are truly grateful for. He currently is managing partner of TS Consulting. And let's see if I have anything else to share about him. He's just a great guy who really is passionate about this topic and has been wonderful in assisting me in moving us forward. Tom Sondergeld, welcome. Thanks for helping me lead the charge today.
Thank you very much. And I welcome everybody to this interesting conversation that's a continuation of last week. Last week, we covered the cost and the impact of cell and gene therapy to employers and those in the market, and some financial models that we've been tracking and growing, and we will continue to put on the CGT Hub as it develops. But in the moment, I'm going to just let the three panelists introduce themselves. I believe that Will has joined, and then we will go into a little bit of a discussion and a Q&A. Thanks for joining, Will. I'll start with Travis. Travis, please introduce yourself for a moment.
Yeah, hey everyone, Travis Bond. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Pharmaceutical Strategies Group, dedicated to our Artometrics platform. So pharmacist by background, working very closely within our organization on our cell and gene therapy consulting services and our analytic solutions that we offer the marketplace. So super excited to be on the panel today. Thanks.
Thanks, Travis. And Dr. Hale?
Hi, everyone. Christine Hale. I know many of you. Good to see everybody. I am currently an independent consultant with specialization in high-cost claims and complex medical conditions, formerly one of the two chief medical officers at Lockton, where I led the large claims team as the medical director. And I also am the designated high-cost claims expert and consultant for the National Alliance of Healthcare Purchaser Coalitions.
Thank you very much. And Will?
Hi, I'm Will Schrank. It's great to be here. I'm an internal medicine physician. My background is I've spent some time in academia, in the federal government at CMMI, and then at a variety of different health plans, most recently as the chief medical officer for Humana. I've been really deeply interested and focused on this issue of access affordability to medications, and recently launched a new company called Aradigm. It's focused on it's a carve-out insurance product to improve access, affordability, sustainability of this category, cell and gene therapy. Excited to join the conversation.
Thank you. And three doctors of some science here, which is pretty cool. And we'll kind of go through this. I do want to just kind of, we are honing in on cell and gene therapy, right? This is a pretty unique class of therapies. I won't even call them drugs because I don't think they are, but let's just define the space first. So cell therapy is basically when we're putting something into the body to change the cellular makeup. And Dr. Hale and Dr. Schrank, you can correct me, but I'm trying to just do layman's terms. It seems that's like cells are inside, right? And gene therapy is where we actually try to introduce something from the outside to change the genetic makeup of the material we're trying to change. And so I think those are pretty fair, but I'll pass it to you guys. And if you want to go deeper into this, let's just kind of define the space of cell and gene therapy and some of the things that people can expect from it, and then we'll go from there. I'll start with Dr. Hale.
All right. Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off. And Dr. Schrank, please also chime in. A couple of clarifications I think are really important because, Tom nailed it. We have to define what it is we're actually trying to solve for before we can solve for it, right? So a couple of nuances and absolutely great job. So cell therapy, you're literally introducing cells. Probably one of the most common and well-known mechanisms are stem cell transplants or bone marrow transplants, right? This is like they've been around forever. We use them for a lot of hematological issues, but also, for some rare conditions. And those are, I would say probably not what we're focusing on for this conversation, because while they're not inexpensive, they aren't the $4 million therapy type things unless things go really wrong. The newer therapies that I think we're really wanting to get our arms around, the types of cell therapies where we are doing a lot of modifications to cells. So we're not just, obliterating your immune system and introducing other cells to take its place, but we're literally things like CAR T therapy, where we're pulling cells out, modifying them, and putting the cells back in, right? Very complex processing, complex patient process, a lot more expensive. And then, of course, the gene therapies, where we are using some sort of, usually like a viral vector, to deliver genetic material. So we're not introducing the cell, we're sending the genetic material in to be integrated into cells that are in the body. And these are way more complex. They're way more complex scientifically and way more complex clinically, and therefore way more expensive typically. So what did I miss, Will?
No, I think you did an awesome job. Both of you did. So I don't think I have a lot to add other than to say that, um, Christine, when and you and I were in medical school, Travis, when you were in clinical school, I don't think any of us would have believed that these kinds of therapies would be available, that you could use your own cells to ultimately attack your own hematologic cancers and cure a hematologic cancer, or use a virus to insert a new piece of gene to cure sickle cell hemophilia. It is so that the science is incredible. And just as Christine, you said, and we're going to talk about today, um, the costs are extraordinary. This is a defining moment for our healthcare system. The costs are extraordinary today. They're going to get better over time. Um, but this is a defining moment. We have these unbelievable breakthroughs, and we have to figure out how to pay for them so that we can get these therapies to those who can benefit. We've now seen what happens, and we can fundamentally change the lives of those who are affected.
I think
And
you're on
Tom, I
mute.
think you're on mute, but I'll jump in while you're on
Yeah,
mute really
go
quick.
for it.
So
I just wanted to get a pharmacological point of view because I think there's a lot of interest.
Well, I think we
All
touched on the
combined.
pharmacological side, but Christine, I think you mentioned this, and this is going to be a resounding theme, I know, throughout this entire conversation: the cost aspect and the differences between cell therapies and gene therapies being largely a one-time cost up front. And what's really unique about a lot of these one-time treatments is often the clinical benefit can take quite some time to fully manifest. And I think, understanding the difference, of course, between cell therapies and gene therapies, and how gene therapies take that time to kind of clinically manifest and understand the improvement in your condition, and some of the functional kind of improvement and the complications of tracking that, and actually kind of seeing the benefit, if you will, of some of the gene therapies, is, I think, a very unique difference between gene therapies and cell therapies. There's some similarities, but a very, very huge difference. And I think that it plays a huge role in some of the complicating factors of how you fund it, how you pay for it, how you manage these patients, and how the whole healthcare ecosystem can sustain the innovation in this space. Because I agree, well, exciting innovation that, I think back to pharmacy school, I don't know, I think we spent a semester on vaccines. We didn't even talk about vaccine, capsid delivery of it was not even a thing when we were in school. It would have been really cool to be able to peer into the crystal ball and see that this was coming, a decade or two later. So yeah, super exciting.
We kind of did. Star Trek. I'm a Star Trek fan. I was born in the 60s, and
Yeah.
Star Trek had this. It was like the iPad is what they were using on Star
Yeah,
Trek.
they were walking around. Yep.
It's like amazing how some of the stuff self-predicts itself, but it is fascinating. I mean, somebody who's suffered with some diseases in my own life, it's to know that there's cure potential. Hopefully these things really do long-term cure and they're not repetitive and the DNA doesn't like recycle itself, which we're definitely afraid of, but it is curative, right? And I think it's important for employers and all of us to understand that while it's costly, it's also costly to have these folks in our healthcare system with their disease. Like MS patients visit the hospital 6 to 7 times a year for long-term stays. And you just add that to all the other diseases, cancer and sickle cell disease. And now to think that we have a potential cure for some forms of these diseases. And now remember, this is DNA, and so it's very not everything is going to work. So that if there's an MS cure, it's not going to cure all of MS, right? There's classes of cancer, there's classes of MS, and so we have to understand this as employers. This I wanted to get this foundation in. We kind of did it last week, but this you guys, physicians and doctors of pharmacy that are really in this mix, right? This is where it's at, and we have to start there, like Christine said. now we get into, okay, now we have this cost burden. And this cost burden for employers is troublesome because not everybody stays with us, right? The disease burden is shared as they move from employer to employer because someone with disease isn't on my plan anymore. I'm not paying for them anymore, right? And so this is the problem without universal health care or some form of it, where you have bifurcation of even by state, right? Sometimes even state regulations don't allow. So you have this quirky system where now I'm going to pay for this thing that's going to change the trajectory of somebody's long-term health care. And they're not going to stay with me. They're just not. I mean, you can do everything. They're going to have affinity for you for paying this. They're going to love you as an employer, but they're not going to stay with you. And so this is where the crux of this problem comes in. It's not necessarily the payment of the drug itself. It is large, and for smaller employers, mid-sized employers, it is a problem. $4 million, $5 million can whack a budget. At Walgreens, I could hide $4 million. We had some preterm babies and some hemophilia patients that were that costly, and it was easy in $1 billion healthcare plan. But not everybody has that luxury. And so if we're trying to solve for the lower employer pool, we don't have a risk pool that can assume all of this, right? And so what we're talking about today is, okay, so pharma is now creating this great molecule driven structure, right, for RNA and DNA, and we're going to have to pay for it. So now we have pharma, which is over here in the ecosystem, and we have employer, which is over here in the ecosystem, and we have all these middle people, right? There's health plans and TPAs and carriers and PBMs and GPOs, and there's all this stuff in the middle that wants to participate and take from the revenue streams and all the things that happen there. But there's this employer that's going to pay and this pharma company that needs to get this in the market, right? And they need to. I mean, they have to because that's how you drop cost. And so how do you bring those two together that have never really talked together before? Because they're going to have to solve this problem either with warranties or performance guarantees or some structure. And there are companies that some of them on this talk today. We're not going to talk about those structures, but that financial model is really important. And that connection between pharma and employer, I'm sorry this is long-winded, but it is the crux of our conversation today. So how do we bring us together? How do we talk together? What is the language that we need to share with each other? And how beneficial could that be? And this time I'll start with Will.
That's a big question. And I think we all have a lot of different ways to go at this. I think one of the first challenges is it's hard to be an employer and to sort of lean with your chin if you don't know what others are doing. And if you're ahead of if you're ahead of the industry in terms of your generosity or coverage, you can pay the price, even though your motivation is only to take the best care you can of your employees and their family. There is a need for, and frankly, has to be an expectation around some sort of collective action here, where we can't all just sort of be making these decisions one off and say, hey, well, I hope everybody else, if we all do this, we'll all be okay. We have to have an honest, open, explicit conversation. We have to bring, employers together. And, it happens to be that this is an organization that does just that. We have to bring people together and say, hey, we as a group, we owe this to our employees. So we have to think about how we do it together. And there is safety in numbers. There is protection in kind of going at this together. And then you don't have that adverse selection problem. The other thing is there will never be a simple single like silver bullet here. You got at it, Tom, and this is a really rich conversation. This is an ecosystem problem. There's no single actor that you can solve this with. You did talk about the two ends of the spectrum. The middle, you can't ignore the provider. The provider plays obviously a very central role here. Right now, nobody's really winning, frankly. The purchasers are struggling with the complexity and the volatility and the uncertainty. Providers are struggling in this environment because they don't know how much volume they're going to get. It's very, very complicated for them in terms of how they get paid and when they get paid. And It makes it hard for them to sort of invest appropriately in a sustainable business model. And manufacturers, we've seen some really high quality products that have kind of flopped in the market. This is the moment, I think, that you bring everybody gives a little to get a lot. And you kind of bring the ecosystem together and create with collective action amongst the purchasers and an ecosystem approach where everybody kind of locks arms and says, this is a defining moment, we can solve it together. I think that this is the moment actually that because no one's really winning, that I think you can bring everyone to the table and to develop the right solution.
Yeah. Anything to add, Travis?
No, I agree with you, Will. I mean, I think the current ecosystem, although we need to do some rejiggering and some coming to the table together with the right stakeholders in a more, I think, proactive way. I think we're all focused on the right thing here, which is innovation and improving patient outcomes in some of these very rare conditions that have exciting innovation surrounding them. It's just, yeah, I think leveraging these coalition forums and ways that we can bring the right minds together into boardrooms to have these conversations on how do we all win. And winning is not all the financial proposition, right? A lot of it's just winning through alignment and through functional and operational kind of you know just polishing, right? Getting the therapy from all the way from the manufacturer down to the patient traditionally has been simple. In this space, it's not so simple. It's actually way more complex than a lot of people even understand. So leveraging the provider side and just making sure that all voices are part of this strategy and all these development forums, I think is critical.
Christine, I want to try to twist the question a little bit because I think the angle you can bring here is really important from both data and from just provider, right? The provider is they're kind of like the orchestra. They're the one who are going to tell the patient to go there and so they have to believe in this, right? And then we are so distant as employers from providers as well. And how can that ecosystem needs to change, right? It's just there's misaligned, not even incentives, there's just misaligned partnership, and the real payer is the employer in a self-insured space, and the real problem is there's a pharma drug that needs to get to the market, that needs to get to the member, and the only way to do that is through the provider, right? They're the ones that have to tell them this is the thing you need to do. How do we do that? How do we change this ecosystem, and what are the mechanisms that we need to kind of do to get providers and employers and pharma to start talking together?
Yeah, what a great question. And if you can indulge me for 20 seconds, I just want to tell a quick story relative to Will's comment earlier about the collective good. So one of your sibling coalitions did a high cost claims workshop with us over the summer, and they chose cell and gene therapy as a deep dive area. So we were, 3/4 of the way through this 4-hour workshop when we get to that section, and I had spent 3 hours listening to all of that. They have many of their employee members are in the same industry, and they literally had said multiple times over 3 hours how it's like high turnover, but they're all going, it's like literally they all share the same pool of employees and they're bouncing between. And then we get to this section and they're all like, we can't cover that, we have high turnover. I was like, did I not just hear you say that you guys are literally like, I think you guys need to talk about what your strategy is, because you're all trying to kick the can down the road and you're kicking it to each other. So like,
Right.
that maybe we need to have a conversation about this. But anyways, moving on to your other question, I do think that there's the provider. Let me talk about the payer or the pharma first, and then we pivot to the provider, because I think we've done more conversations between employer and pharma, and I think we're getting somewhere, although we have a ways to go. And that is when these first came out, it was basically like, sorry for your luck, here's your multi-million-dollar claim. And oh, by the way, by definition, these are typically genetic conditions. And it was not uncommon for us to see, like, if we saw one spinal muscular atrophy gene therapy, there were 2 or 3, right? Because like there were other siblings that had the same condition. So, that was pretty scary. And then manufacturers started coming to the table and saying, well, what if we warranty this, right? Like, what if it doesn't work? Because that was one of the biggest things with employers, like, am I going to spend all this money and with the promise of maybe saving on the maintenance therapy, the things we're using right now that are suboptimal but still very expensive. But if it doesn't work, now I've paid for a couple $1 million and I'm still paying for this very expensive maintenance therapy, right? warranty was great until we started talking with the manufacturers and saying, but guys, like who's getting the check? Like who gets this warranty check, right? First of all, how do we know when the member failed? Who's paying attention to that? And then secondly, once that's been established, how do we make sure the money gets back to the people who paid the bill? Right. And the first iteration, they were like, well, we're gonna pay the administrator and basically hope it gets back to the right people. We were like, no. Then it was like, okay, well, we're gonna pay the employer. Well, what if they've moved? And how do we try, how if I paid for this, but then they failed and they were already in somebody else's health plan? How are we doing? And then how does money get back to the stop loss carrier if they paid the bill, right? So I still think we've got a lot of work to do, but I feel like the manufacturers are hearing us now on that point that like you can't just give the money to the administrator and hope it makes it back to the right employer. Like that's just not going to work, right? The providers, I think, is still an untapped like place that we need to get that conversation going because you're absolutely right. Like I can't tell you how many stop loss carrier quarterly check-in calls I sat in where literally every single one of them was like, Dr. Hale, have you guys had any gene therapy claims? They're just waiting. Like Roctavian came out for hemophilia and like everybody thought it was going to break literally everyone's bank. And it was like crickets. And we kept just waiting for the shoe to drop. And I'm like, there's a lot of conversation. I mean, there's obviously some concerns. These aren't without potential side effects. If you have a patient who's well maintained on maintenance therapy, like
Why does it? Yeah.
do they want to rock the boat? But so I think there is a lot of conversation that needs to happen about who are the best candidates for these, what is the best value for that member over time, and then how do we, make sure that providers are aware when these things are covered and that members are aware that these things, if we are going to cover them, that they're available and they can have those conversations and empower them to have those conversations. But right now everybody's just been kind of waiting, and I'll tell you, like, I don't think everyone coming forward is going to be a Roctavian. We are going to we are like standing at the edge of the cliff. Like, and there's so many more therapies like in consideration investigation right now that we need to figure this out sooner rather than later. We can't just stick our head in the sand and hope that every single one that comes out after this is going to be like Roctavian, where it's been very slow to uptake.
Yeah, I saw one that just was announced the other day. It's a cancer therapy and it's using nanotechnology, right? And every time we learn, it's just like we learned so much during COVID about RNA, right? And now we've opened the door to DNA and RNA, and so the floodgates are opening. Travis, it's interesting because this is not your typical therapy, right? This does not typically go through the benefit plan of the pharmacy, right? This goes through the medical plan. And so the knowledge about this, it's not going to show up on a formulary likely, right? At a PBM. And so the likelihood of understanding whether or not this is going to get covered could get very disparate from the employer because it's going to be the decision of the TPA or the health plan or the network whether or not they even introduce it, right? And so now we've got to figure out that whole mess. How do you think PBMs are going to kind of figure out a way into this a little bit? Because I think they'll probably see a revenue stream. And how do you think they'll kind of work with us or not?
You think PBMs will find a way in, Tom? Is that what you're hinting
Well, they seem to find a way into everything. I
Yeah.
saw a PBM
Well,
yesterday announce a wellness program.
yeah, well, there's a lot of different types of PBMs out there, right? So some of the larger PBMs have a totally different business model and organizational structure than some of the smaller PBMs. And
Yeah.
there's different reasons why some larger PBMs might have a vested interest in potentially partaking in the gene therapy market versus some smaller PBMs that might not have
Okay.
entities and assets that are provider focused or risk based focused entities, such as some of the large big three PBMs, just to pick on them since we always seem to on on many of these calls. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to PBM's interests to manage costs on behalf of their clients and do it in a way that collaborates with their fellow medical carrier partners. And I think any of the PBMs that are in an organizational structure where they're close to a medical carrier in the same organization as a medical carrier, they're going to by default always be involved when it's a carved in environment because their plans are going to expect them to be involved. They're going to expect them to coordinate care when patients are seeking therapies. And the reality is some of these gene therapies that are that are approved do have on pharmacy benefit alternatives that many of these patients might be on currently, right? And so I think there's something interesting to be had in terms of, understanding the risk that it currently exists within a population that are seeing claims on the pharmacy side already. There's a lot of therapies that are approved where you can look at pharmacy claims and you can identify who's likely or potentially eligible to receive a gene therapy based upon not just their pharmacy claims, but of course you've got to look at their medical claims too and see, try to stratify their disease severity and their hospitalization rates and so on and so forth. So, I see PBMs playing a big role in the coordination of the experience on the member side for a lot of conditions, especially those conditions that straddle the pharmacy and medical benefit in terms of receiving therapies and um,
Yeah.
um, kind of in that world. So I see them playing a big role there. Of course, there's some PBMs that have some affiliated assets in the gene therapy pharmacy side in terms of their interest in actually supplying the therapies and being a part of kind of that supply chain side. So I think PBMs are kind of chasing down that world in terms of where they can deliver solutions. And then I've seen PBMs start to innovate in the risk space too, where they're trying to try to introduce some risk bearing vehicles where they can approach clients and actually kind of try to sell a risk bearing product that might cover gene therapies in the event that a client has an unexpected claim. It could be an alternative or an augmentation of sorts to other risk sharing strategies. So a lot of different areas. Ultimately it's going to be therapy by therapy, I guess is my point. I think some of them are going to be involving PBM, some of them are going to be completely outside of it and through the medical carrier. But at the end of the day, PBMs play in the ballpark of drug management, so they're they're going to want to be involved. And especially when, the last point I'll make is I think we all understand this, but a $3 million therapy, 1% of a $3 million therapy, quick math is what, $30,000. So just a really quick ability for any organization, not just a PBM, to take a sliver of that drug cost as revenue is going to be appetizing, whether it's a PBM, a vendor, anybody in that entire kind of ecosystem. So I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about also, which is how you make it a win-win, but not make it, too much of a win for one of the stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem.
Or a win squared win.
Yeah.
So I want to do one more question, then I want to bring in our employers. But for the audience that's with us, participants, if you'd like to ask a question, if you look down on your Zoom bar at the bottom, you'll see a line of little trinkets. There's one called Q&A. Please feel free to ask any questions of the panel, and we'll ask them that. And before I bring in my employer friends, just one more question. Will, to start with you, yeah, there we go. For you, Will, and we'll go around the horn before we bring in the employers. This will be probably a short one, but when you think about this stuff for employers, and you think about how employers can, one, band together, but two, look at financial models that might be helpful and warranties, how do you think that contracting is going to happen? It can't be one by one employer, right? That's just going to take forever for pharmaceutical manufacturers to figure that out. Where do you see that playing the piece? Should employers be thinking about that, or is it going to come from somewhere else?
So I think all employers are going to need some kind of a solution to help them manage the complexity of this category. I don't believe it's feasible for an employer to try to sort of do this by the ones on their own. I do think that it's going to be very, very hard to sort of piece together the parts of the pie here. Like we just heard from both from Travis and Christine, we're going to need really progressive, thoughtful contracting with manufacturers where there are clear expectations around performance guarantees. We're going to need to think differently around how we contract with providers so that the providers become part of the team, essentially part of that solution around driving value and measuring outcomes. It's almost impossible, and we certainly, in this environment, we absolutely need better sort of clinical policy assessment because most of these trials are approved in an accelerated, most of these drugs are approved in an accelerated fashion with a couple dozen patients in their pivotal trials. And we don't know a lot about, as you said earlier, Tom, we don't know a lot about durability and real world evidence, and we absolutely need to be sort of nimble and purpose built in how we establish and refine our clinical policies. If you start thinking about those sort of three key levers of value, clinical policy, deeper and more integrated networking with providers, more collaboration with providers, and direct and more aligned contracting with manufacturers. I think ideally you need to start thinking about how do you sort of have collective action around all three of them. And I think there are going to be partners and solutions out there that can do that. And I think that's exactly what employers should demand and expect, is that they're going to get help from a partner that's going to be able to sort of address the ecosystem here rather than a bunch of these different point solutions.
Yeah, well said. I think just one more point I want to make. I think the challenge here is that even with a large population, the chance of you right now having one of these in your mix is really rare. And so if you really go back to the old thinking about insurance, insurance is best sold when you have a good way to pool your risk, right? And lower your margin in that risk pool. And so the combination of employers in some fashion to bring about a risk pool is probably not a bad concept, right? And so Christine and Travis, as I bring in my employer friends, and I want them to come in now, think about that and how can employers really figure that out and think about, because there's a lot of things to get over, right? In a multi-employer risk pool or any environment like that. We've explored that last year, but now we're getting real close to, we have to make some decisions here. And to talk about that risk pooling and how can that be helpful, and you're a data person, Christine, just how that helps kind of solidify some of the risk here. And let's bring in Jason and Dan and Sherry, and we can all have a conversation together around the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick thought on that. Honestly, this was the concept when lifetime and annual maxes went out the window with the Affordable Care Act. Why we had all but the largest or most cash rich businesses buying stop loss coverage, right? Because they were like, particularly if you're, like I said, like a smaller or mid-sized employer, you can't necessarily absorb what is now sometimes a $20 million claim on some of these things, right? And so that is why we have insurance, right? Is to pull the risk. And I think, the challenge is again when you may not get one. First of all, today you may not get one, but if you do get one, you may get three, right? Like this is an exceptionally high burden for an individual employer who is all but the largest and most cash rich. So we really do need that pooling. And I think especially as stop loss carriers today, as I mentioned, we were doing these quarterly calls with them, and because it was such a rare event, a lot of them were still covering it. But we're definitely hearing now stop loss carriers starting to say, like, maybe they're not outright carving them out yet or excluding them, but they're saying like I'm starting to hear more about what we call conditional lasers, where they'll be like, well, this person will have the same deductible as everyone else unless they get the gene therapy, and then their deductible is $4 million, right? Like, so we're already starting to hear they see the tide coming, right? And know that if they just get like deluged with this, they go out of business. So we have to find another way to risk share. And again, I think pulling together that common good. And I mean, this is a pipe dream of mine, but I really wish there was a way that we could at least have some kind of a registry, because back to the earlier point about the problem is trying to figure out like who's paying what into the pot and then who's getting the benefit out of the pot, and trying to track those members when they're changing, when employers are changing their administrator and their PBM, and employees are moving from employer to employer. Like it's incredibly complex. And if there was some sort of a registry, or they move providers, right? Like, and now we've got somebody new who's got the data about whether they failed therapy. So I think we're going to have to figure out a way to have that kind of a tracking system, but that's a pretty heavy lift, and a lot of parties that would have to come together to make something like that happen.
You should pioneer that, Christine.
I know, right? Trademark.
Push it forward.
For what it's worth, some of the data interoperability rules will make a lot of those that less of a pipe dream and much
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
realistic.
The high cost therapy commission. After we get the shutdown solved. Dan and Jason and Sherry, thank you all for coming in. Can we switch to the picture of everybody so that they're all on the screen together? Thank you so much. Not, we can skip that. Everybody, like if you put I don't know how you do so that everybody's on the screen live. But Jason, I'll have you introduce yourself. We'll start with Dan first. I'm sorry, we'll just follow this. Dan, why don't you introduce yourself? Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Very, very much appreciate being part of this chat conversation here today. Dan Denser, I'm a manager within the health and wellness design area of United Airlines, and look forward to discussing this topic with you.
Thanks. Jason?
Jason Duhan, a director of Total Rewards at Caterpillar, and I have responsibility for benefits and health, which includes U.S. Healthcare.
And Carol couldn't be here today. She just took the role of global benefits and employee mobility at HP. So we wish her well. She's kind of stuck in some meetings, and we wish her well and wish she could have been here, but she's great to have on the panel. And then Sherry, introduce yourself.
Sure, Tom. Thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm the former VP of Total Rewards for Sargento Foods and now retired, but have small consulting business primarily to help out in the coalition world to help solve problems like this, if there's any way that I can help. So thanks again for having me.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. This is just a continuation, and Dan and Jason, Sherry, you guys were here last. I think Sherry, you had to miss, but we did miss you, and we're glad you could come to this time. But this is a continuation of our conversation yesterday, focusing more on those relationships, right? How are we going to do this in this ecosystem that today is, I love that word, that's going to become like transparent or well-being, right? We're going to use it too much. But right now it is the problem. The ecosystem is not built for this structure. So, Jason, because you're so intimately close with your new pharmacy design that you have at Caterpillar, which is amazing and has shown tremendous results. Talk about how you see this particular situation. You've been exploring it for a while on your own and with other people. And so how do you see this and employers, and how do you see us talking more with our partners that are kind of in this ecosystem that really drive the change?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. And, Christine was talking about employers and how we need to consider working together because we may pay for some of these therapies and then employees move on. We may get employees who have already had some of these therapies. But I think it's more complicated for employers because, a very large jumbo employer profitability may be measured in millions or hundreds of millions, maybe if you're fortunate, $1 billion. But for small and mid-sized employers, your profitability may be measured in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe a couple of million if you're fortunate. And we're talking about a pipeline right now in a population the size that I manage. We may have, these aren't real numbers, but for illustration, maybe 30 to 40 candidates for some of these therapies that are in the marketplace right now. And as a jumbo employer, we could probably manage that, as I heard you say earlier, Tom. But that's with the products that are available in the market today. What employers are worried about before we make these decisions is what about the pipeline in the future? And what I've talked about before is type 1 diabetes. So in a population the size of mine, let's say it's 400 candidates for this therapy, half of them get it, 200. You're now talking about $400 million just for one therapy out of the
quarterly budget.
So while there's the altruistic part of us that says, boy, these are great therapies and we would love to cover these for everyone, companies aren't in the business just to solely pay for healthcare and gene and cell therapy. They're in business to provide product services and bring things to market. And so it's a really big and difficult question for employers. But I think what I focused on is can we focus on not just any one particular point solution, as I heard Will mention earlier. I don't think you can't provide patchwork to try to provide a solution here. We're looking for a comprehensive solution that includes negotiating the cost down in the supply chain with manufacturers and COEs, the warranties if the product doesn't work because they are getting rapid approvals before long-term data is available, the warranties if product fails, the COEs involved in like who's going to administer these, and are we going to send patients to the COEs? Like there's a lot of questions like that. Should we or should we not have stop loss? Should we be risk pooling? And I like this format here where you bring employers together to start considering all of those options, so we can at least get a feel for what other employers are thinking about this.
Yeah, Dan, I'll come to you in a second, but I want to turn to Sherry because Sherry's from a smaller employer, right? And 30 claims, Jason, would decimate Sherry's prior population. So, Sherry, talk a little bit. You've thought a lot about this. Talk a little bit about the impact and what your concerns are as a mid-sized smaller employer. And then there's a question in the box, and I'll come to that after I go to Dan.
Yeah, sure, Tom, thanks. And Jason, you're right. 30 claims for your population is one thing. One claim for and we had 4,400 belly buttons, I'll call, on our plan, 2,500 employees. So one claim, one hemophilia claim can bring us to our knees and send the premium skyrocketing the next year for all that are covered on the plan. So, and we've had some large, not cell and gene therapy, but a large specialty med that was 2.7 in perpetuity every year. Well, 2.7 was half of our, doubled basically our pharmacy spend. So while it wasn't cell and gene therapy, it certainly was a large claim. And we did everything we could to try and mitigate that claim, get the person the care they need, because it was doing what it needed to do to help the person with their outcomes and their medical condition. But how do we make sure that we're doing our fiduciary obligation to all the belly buttons on the plan and making sure that their plan is affordable year after year? Well, I've actually gone to the manufacturer. They're not going to, you hit the nail on the head. I think we've talked about this before. Manufacturers are not going to be taking individual employers, especially the small employers, small and mid-sized employers, and doing one-off contracts. That's just not feasible, right? They didn't even know how to talk to me. And I can be a bull in a china shop or a dog with a bone. Give me, I'm gonna keep asking maybe a different way, the question a different way to try and figure it out. It just, they didn't know how to talk to us. So one claim, it makes you stand up and take notion. I mean, the CFO made a comment back in the day. Well, maybe we should just buy the pharmaceutical manufacturer. What? No, we're not in pharmacy. We're in cheese. And he was kind of half-heartedly saying that, but how do we figure it out? I don't know. I think collectively as an employer organization, as a coalition, whether it be MBGH or the National Alliance of Healthcare Purchasers, because some of these conditions are so rare, even Jason's group might not find, have it, or Dan's group, that are much larger than our group was or is today, is a realistic thing. But collectively, and I think about, honestly, the following the patient around. We all take care of LTD claims, and LTD claims are there. We've changed carriers multiple times with our long-term disability programs. And they keep finding them because they were a Sargento, employee, even though it may be ONOC versus any OC, and they can't, so they're going to find them. So Christine, I think there's something to that, whether it be on the LTD type of a model, the, life insurance riders, or a separate policy. There's got to be something, because stop loss covered our specialty medication year one. But guess what they do? Year 2, 3, 4, they're coming after you with a 50% increase, and you're not going to get anybody to quote on your plan because you're now hot potato, and they don't want that risk. So, and they're going to make up for lost revenue in future years. So it really is a catastrophic thing for small and medium employers who probably are going to be this wait and see until they get a claim, and then it's like all hands on deck.
And Dan, I'll turn to you, then I'm going to go to the clinical group. Dan, when you listen to this conversation and you hear some of the challenges, and your population is quite large, but you have a very diverse population, and you've got unions to deal with and other things that are just complicating your world and the market today and all the things you have to deal with. It's a lot. When you add this to it, and then you think about the difficulty of having these conversations or trying to reach the right place, where do you think the future will focus for you on how you're going to talk and how you're going to engage with folks like this. Will you predominantly go through coalitions? Will you look to your pharmacy friends? Will you look to your medical plan? How will you try to kind of figure out where you're going with this mess and what the risks could be in the future?
Right. So our population is a little bit different. I was listening to a lot of what Christine was saying, where the coalition group that you were talking to, the different parties were changing employees and they just kind of swapped people back and forth. And in a seniority-based business, union-based environment that United has, our employees really do stay with us. Part of that's the culture that we've built over time. Part of that is um, you get shift priority based on how long you've been here. 90% of our folks are in the field. So we don't have people that are sitting in an office environment. They're out working at the airports, taking care of our customers. So it's a little bit different there. Our population has across the gambit. We have some very, very young new people, but we have people who have been with us 20, 30, 40 years. And those are the folks that are the ones that are more likely to go down the cell and gene therapy area. I look at what makes it complex. And what makes it complex is the actual treatment is very complex. And it's not for everybody. So once you find someone that has to do that, and I'm not sure who made the point earlier, but these treatments once were extremely rare. They're not going to be as rare as they were. So we need to really take a look at how we can handle that cost from a fiduciary perspective. We have to be responsible to everybody, and making sure that we pay attention to that. Talk to our consultants, talk to our partners. Christine, you mentioned something I've said a couple times: get your head out of the sand. You can't just bury your head anymore. But even the size of someone like Caterpillar or someone like United, we don't necessarily have a voice at the manufacturers. A group that might have a relationship with the manufacturers can speak for you on your behalf to be able to set up, okay, here's a stop loss idea. Here is a pool idea. Here's a coalition idea. Let's gather that all together. Let's bring that all into, Tom, your word, ecosystem, and make that a combination approach to have that combination of services together so that we can be fiduciary stewards, but also provide the care that our members need.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Jason. And we'll come back to you guys for another round. There is a question in the box. I don't know if you guys saw it, but the conversation in the box is: are cell therapies being approached differently than gene therapies? Many of what we've talked about is gene therapies, and cell therapies might be more common. So what is the difference? I'll start with Christine, and then I'll go to Will, and then I'll go to Jason.
Yes, I'm so glad somebody asked that question, because I was like trying to find the right place in the conversation to make that make that point,
That's
which
good.
is the clients I was working with when I was at Locked In, by and large, were all covering cell therapies. They were, for more common conditions, they had typically a lower per incident or per use price tag. And so that was more common, and it was more on these ultra high cost, gene therapies, where there was kind of a split between, are we going to cover these? Are we not? We're going to cover some of them. Not to say that as we get more cell therapies out there and they get more sophisticated, and if that raises the price tag, that won't change. But I definitely did have some employers that were saying, like, well, we'll cover the cell, but not the gene. Just because they were like, we're going to have to set a limit somewhere, because back to that fiduciary responsibility. But the exposure felt a little less on the cell therapy side. Now, the other thing that's interesting about cell therapy is, with some of the success, particularly in areas like cancer, there's been a lot of conversation around what used to be like a third or fourth line therapy becoming more of like a second or even first line therapy, which then of course increases the number of eligible people. So, that dynamic could change, but that's a really great question.
Yeah,
Will,
I'd love to
yeah.
just to pile on, Christine. That last comment is, I think, really, really telling. We, CAR T's been around for a decade now, and we've seen the outcomes, and they are good. We are learning more about the adverse events and the complications, and we're getting a lot better at managing them. And the recent FDA relaxation of the REMS requirement will, without question, massively increase the frequency that CAR-T is being delivered for the indications for which it's approved today. And you're right, for those indications, we are seeing the line of therapy. It's an earlier line of therapy for existing indications. The other thing is we're starting to see pretty darn compelling evidence that we're going to see CAR-T for solid tumors and even for autoimmune diseases. So in a world where CAR-T is being used to treat all of those indications, increasingly in the outpatient setting, and with a better ability to manage the sort of adverse events, it is almost unfathomable to me that you could ever not cover it. That's front page of the New York Times, or wherever you are, risk. And it is not gonna be a rarity. It's gonna be the norm. This is now it'll be part of the sort of much more routine management of patients with these illnesses. So this is to build on Christine's good comment around not putting your head in the sand. If you're not thinking about how to sort of build a network and an approach around CAR-T today, you're kind of falling behind.
Yeah. And I think we get better as we do more, right? So if I think back to bone marrow transplant, right? Remember the day when they first did, most of the patients didn't make it, and their survival wasn't long. Today, bone marrow transplant's almost like a secondary thing. It only costs about $300,000. It's relatively like when Humira first came out. I use it as a great example. Everybody said, "Oh my God, we're going to kill the market," and look, Humira's cost is nothing now, and we don't even talk about it. So I think it's stuff like that where. But I do think you are absolutely right, Will. The prevalence of this stuff is not going to go away. We're going to just see more. They start to solve diabetes and musculoskeletal disease and other things that are genetic related. We're going to see a much bigger part of our population, like Jason said. So I think we have to start thinking of the future, right? And how the impact is going to be to the future. Because if we don't plan now, these things are not going to happen overnight, right? And so when you think about that, Travis, what kind of planning do you think an employer needs to be thinking about in relation to that? Adding on to what everybody's already said, what other thoughts do you have about how an employer and partners of employers can start to work together and plan together?
Yeah, trying to add on, but think a little bit differently. I talked a little bit earlier about a passion that I have and a focus area within PSG that I have on leveraging data. I feel really, really passionately in this space that there's a lot to learn from what you already have in-house that you probably don't have your hands completely wrapped around in a way that makes sense. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of current utilization of drug products and current utilization of healthcare services that help you understand as an employer, is your risk in line with prevalence models of some of these ultra rare conditions, and do you have risk that might be more or potentially might be less than what you see in the general population? And we haven't really even got this deep, but a lot of these conditions have very geographical differences and differences amongst different subpopulations where one employer of one size might have a completely different risk profile than a different employer of the exact same size and the exact same demographics for the most part. And it really just comes down to some of it being chance, but again, some of it being geographical kind of positioning. There's even deeper kind of factors around, where your employees are located within the United States, and do they have access to some of these, qualified treatment centers that might indicate that there's a higher likelihood that somebody might actually, seek a gene therapy. So I'm a big advocate for, now's the time to look at your data in a very, very strategic way and partner where you can with organizations that know how to look at that data and say, is my risk actually drastically more than what I think it is? And that's something you want to know now, because now is the time to really start to raise your hand, participate in some of these forums, get involved in strategies to manage that risk. And the reality is, even if you don't see tangible risk right now within your data, you do have risk, because a lot of these are genetic conditions that may not be in your population yet. And some of them are kind of hidden. Some of them are hidden in diagnosis codes and indications that are sub-diagnoses of certain diagnosis codes, and you can't just easily see it within the data. So you know, I'll beat that drum all day, every day, because I feel very, very passionately that if you're not looking, you don't know what you don't know. And I think, you know, just looking at claims alone doesn't tell you a lot. You've got to layer some expertise on top of that. So that's one of the big things that I would know as part of this group is I think knowing what you're faced with helps you go into these conversations with not just intelligence about your risk, but helps you understand the gravity by which it might impact your company as a whole.
Yeah. So Jason, I know you've already done a lot. Dan, have you started to look at your population, or what's your plan if you are? Because I think it's, you know, you have a massive population, so I think it could be really interesting to hear what results you find if you do it.
Yeah, we are. We are looking very, very carefully at the space. We're a combination of working with our consulting groups and others to really dive into what is the best option for us. Being a very large employer, stop loss wasn't something that we were really interested in. Didn't really seem to make sense. But a combination of several different services might. So looking at, is there an element of stop loss? Is there an element of pharmaceutical manufacturer guarantees? So that if someone is getting treatment today and leaves United and that treatment fails a year down the pike, do we have any recourse? Is there an element of pooling resources together? Get 20, 30, 50 clients all together in a single pool to lower our exposure and see how that might work for us. So, you know, any number of solutions around that layer are things that we really have the sticks in the fire on and are trying to cobble together. We also think that having 5 or 6 or 7 different companies doing each individual thing isn't necessarily the most harmonious way of doing that. It really needs to be cohesive. So we're going down that path, and we'll see what comes out on the other side.
Yeah. Sherry, given your clinical background and some of the things you know, one of the questions in the box from our friend Rebecca is really interesting at J&J. How do employers feel about CAR T being delivered in a community hospital setting? And so we're kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty here, right? So how do you feel about that? And do you feel comfortable kind of allowing that in your plan? And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question. And at Sargento, very rural, so that's a very real possibility. And really, getting the quality data, as Travis talked about, getting your data, but then getting data from your vendor partners. Even if you don't have somebody in your population, have they gone to a quality provider? Sometimes that's hard to get, whether or not that provider is quality or that facility is a quality provider. There are quality providers out there in the community, and I know that patients and their families prefer to use the facilities in their backyard. We have people that didn't want to drive 20 miles all the way into another neighboring town because it was too far away. You know, and certainly we want to make sure that they're going to the best facility, the COE or the, you know, a qualified community provider. There are quality providers out there, even in the rural areas. And I would say just making sure that you have the data to support the quality as CAR T becomes more prevalent and more first line, as you guys were talking about, Dan, Will and Christine were talking about that being more first line. That experience then becomes more pervasive in the provider network, and regardless if it's a community facility or, you know, more in the urban area. It's just making sure that you can get that data and support an individual going to that data, and then have the benefits in your benefit plan that support the family. If it's outside of the community, you have to find those benefits to support the family member going with them to be with them. So travel benefits in your medical plan is important to support the family if they can't be at a facility that's drivable on a daily basis. certainly, you know.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Will, we're talking about data and a lot of this is about how to do predictability in your workforce, right? What are some of the data thoughts that employers need to think about? What kind of data do I need to kind of cobble together to give to somebody to assess our prevalence and risk as we look at our, especially for a population that's transient?
So it's a great question, and I think Travis was getting at the fact that it's that you have to get really specific here, especially for the handful of conditions like sickle cell hemophilia, where the types of therapies that those patients are taking and the frequency at which they've had adverse events or hospitalizations, health services use over the previous couple of years is a really important predictor about their eligibility and then hence their likelihood of receiving the therapies. But one of the things that's particularly challenging and I think can be really hard to interpret is the difference between sort of projecting out or sort of stating the exposure and just listing the numbers of people with conditions and what the high end of utilization could be, which never seems congruent with what the use was this year or last year. And the fact that there is a demand factor that's real, and that demand factor is, the actual expectations are considerably less than just who is eligible. And the ability to sort of really interpret that data through a lens of understanding the market, understanding provider dynamics, understanding coverage dynamics, having sort of a good your thumb on the scale of how uptake has looked over the subsequent years can give an employer a much more nuanced and thoughtful perspective on like what their actual risk is, and also just give them a much better perspective on like what's a reasonable amount to spend to manage that risk. So I would just encourage a much more nuanced approach than just these are who has these conditions and these are who's potentially eligible, and a much more thoughtful approach on who do you actually think, what would reasonable expectations be on the appropriate on uptake in the next year to 3 years to better sort of anticipate that risk and strategize around the right tactics to apply to manage that risk.
And Christine, thank you, Will. Who can employers look to kind of help them with this? Is it their health plan carrier? Is it their consultant? Is it a combination, or is it a third party that does data analytics? Who's kind of best positioned, or is it all of them?
I was going to say D, all of the above.
All.
I will say that the point earlier, and I think Travis really touched on this, just looking to an administrator, just looking to the pharmacy plan is not going to give you the full picture if they're not bundled. So I think that's a real risk. Like, even things like we saw a case where somebody got the gene therapy and we followed them for quite a long time, and the ongoing treatment they were on pre-gene therapy was never even slowed down, much less stopped to see if the gene therapy worked. But neither side knew it, right? Because the gene therapy went through the medical and the other therapy was going through pharmacy, right? So I do think it has to be somebody who has an integrated perspective. And so especially if you're not bundled with those things, you need to be relying on a consultant, or if you have a third party data warehouse / analytics provider. I do think this is a great candidate for some of the data science and AI tools that are coming out. But to Will's point about getting much more nuanced in our ability to predict, I think if we can aggregate that data, my dream registry, but start to learn about who's getting it, but also who's not. Right. And what are those factors, the multitude of factors that come into play in those decisions will help us all get smarter about predicting the risk and then figuring out the right way to address it.
Well, and for a transient population that comes and goes or is just variable, it would be awesome to have a registry, because that registry could actually through AI flag you and say, hey, you guys just got an employee you need to pay attention to, right? And I know that we're HIPAA, I know that but come on, we need to get through some of this stuff, because we're never going to solve this as a single employer, because until we get some other insurance solution, and it's going to be a long way from there, we're still going to have employer health care. So we got to figure this out, right? Travis, anything to add from a data perspective point of view? or coordinate?
I mean, I think between my introduction there, Will, you building on it, and Christine, you hitting the nail on the head. I think we're right on. I think we're right on online. I think ultimately the last thing I think I would probably add in this space is, you know, again, I just will reiterate again, kind of a little bit differently. You know, drug by drug, the nuances amongst expected uptake is huge on kind of planning. You know, there's certain therapies where the road to receive the gene therapy can be 9, 12, 18 months of cell collections, you know, engineering the product into the cells and reinfusing them. So I think understanding the difference between seeing risk within your population, but translating that to actual timing over the next 12 to 24 to 36 months, it just makes it that much more complicated. So, you know, having kind of consultative, you know, partnerships where you can blend the data understanding side with what's going on in the market with the clinical aspects. That's the reason we're here around this fire chatting, because it takes multiple minds to kind of solve that problem. And you know, I'm excited to be part of the groups that can help solve this for the industry, because this ecosystem definitely needs a little bit of infused firepower to solve for this. It's not, you know, going back to the CAR T comment we made earlier and the cell therapy comment, certainly there's been a ton of progress over the past decade in that space. I hope we learn and make double to triple the amount of progress in the gene therapy space over the next decade, because if we don't, I think we're going to be very behind where we even are in the cell therapy space and the gene therapy space in a decade. We've really got to learn how to collaborate even more within our ecosystem and kind of bulk it up.
Well, and as they learn how to combine those, like CAR T combines some of them, if you learn to combine cell and gene therapy into one therapy, there's even more power. Like you could target both ways, right? And really come at something. So I think we'll learn a lot. Jason, when you think about the pathway to the future, and you think about the comment Will made about you know, hey, the therapy is you know, challenging because it's long, right? What happens if somebody's in the middle of the therapy and leave you and they come to another employer? How's that cost going to get picked up? Because we might have already paid it, right? If you pay, so how does that, what do you think about that, Jason? And how do we kind of think about the partnership that needs to happen in order to deal with that menagerie?
I don't know that I've got the answer for that one, but what I can say is that the way that I was thinking about how we might pay for some of these things might include a bundle. And so the bundle might include pre-work, the therapy itself, and maybe post-care follow-up. But your question's a good one, because if an employer pays for that bundle and now the employee leaves as the therapy's still underway, in progress, then what happens? And I don't think I have the answer to that yet. It makes me wonder if a bundled payment system is the right approach here. So interested in hearing what everyone else thinks.
Dan, you have a comment. Thank you.
Oh yeah, and I was going to say on the other side of that, Jason, say you did pay for it and they leave you, and the new employer does not. What happens then?
When you're in the middle of therapy.
It's an interesting paradox, right? One of the things that Sherry was mentioning, and we run into this too, even though we're a company and our employees love to travel, people don't want to go outside of their home environment to get treatment. Mm-hmm. And I think as these treatments become less rare, you will have more local physicians hopefully tying into COEs that will be able to, either through AI or through more interactive learnings, help to set up care plans. So you have the experts talking to the local physicians to really make that happen. It's happening right now with cancer. Yeah. It's happening right now with other complex diseases. I think from a future perspective, you're going to see a lot of the cell and gene therapy going that road, where you're not just going to have your Johns Hopkins and your Mayos and your Cleveland Clinics treating for these things. You're also going to have the local doctors who are going to be able to tie into those ecosystems and provide care.
Yeah,
which will bring about costs. You know, you have to. It's both good and bad in that regard.
Yeah, I think the group over this conversation, and we've only got like 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left. So I kind of want to get into a wrap-up phase here, but good conversation. I stayed warm by the fire because it's kind of cold here in Chicago, and you guys have kept me feeling warm about this because I love this topic. I think there's so much that we can do here. It's the first time where I really think employers and other parts of this ecosystem can come together to maybe solve something, right? Because this cost thing is not going to go away. As you said, Jason, there is so much more coming. Like type 1 diabetes, asthma is on the table. There are some, and think about all the kids that have asthma that are going to probably qualify for this therapy. It's transitional, right? Like I'm on Dupixent for my asthma, and it's amazing. It has cured my asthma, but it is expensive. That drug is like $10,000 a month. And so you think about this stuff that's out there, it's pretty amazing. So I think as we're wrapping, I think just 2 minutes each. And Cheryl, please feel free to come in if you'd like. She's the boss. I'm just here as the moderator by the fire. If she has anything to add, I'd love her to kind of do that because she's a very intricate part of this whole discussion. I'll let Cheryl talk, and then maybe we can just do a little round robin for 2 minutes each and kind of wrap it with what you think is the most important thing employers and pharma and providers can take away from this conversation and where we go from here. Cheryl, you first.
Well, what an amazing panel. Once again, just fantastic information. So grateful to all of you. And I'm just going to remind those of you on the phone, this is your chance to ask questions. We may ask these guys to do a 1-minute wrap up if we get some questions. We, as you know, have been working hard to figure out what is going on out there, what models are going to stick, which ones are more about others making money, bringing best practices to the table. And we're going to continue to work on that. So if any of you have more ideas about what you're seeing in the market, let us know. I think we're going to have another one of these webinars in the first quarter of 2026, where we talk about those models and what we're seeing in the marketplace. And each of the experts here, Travis, Christina, and Will, are all seeing what is happening in that space. And I'm sure Sherry, Jason, and Dan are being talked about what's happening in that space. But there's still a lot of questions in the air. And who is driving, as it's been alluded to, who is driving that potential innovation drives the value of it as well. So I'm going to go back to you guys, but if you have questions, here's your last chance. Then I'm going to share an update to one of our resources at the end. I've got a quick 3-question survey to have you guys respond to so we can learn from you. And who wants to start this round robin? I'm giving you 1 minute now.
I'll kick it off because I think I'm getting kicked out of the office that I just stole from some lovely guy at a conference. I would say that the thing to do right now is to activate on this topic. This is not a topic that you can kind of lean back and be on your heels and it'll just take care of itself. I think we learned our lesson with GLP-1s, which turned out to be an unbelievably expensive, but it's still a much simpler category than what we're talking about here. Resting on your heels and reacting is not the way to manage the opportunity and the cost. There are great solutions out there that are sort of emerging, and there are opportunities now to create that collective action with your colleagues and with the industry and to take this ecosystem approach. And I would encourage you to roll up your sleeves, learn more, engage, and take this on more directly.
Thank you, Will. And if you have to leave, feel free. Thank you so much for your time. We'll go to Christine.
I would say we have to find a way to look at the data. We can't solve what we can't see. And right now it's all in tiny pockets all over the place. And so we've got to find a collective way to address this, like seeing what's really happening and then using good data science and tools to not only predict, but address in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Thank you, Christine. Travis.
I almost got through a webinar without GLP-1s getting brought up. So Will had to drop it and then disappear.
I was trying not to.
All right. So yeah, no, I think ultimately employers definitely have the opportunity to lead here, not just react to what's going on. I think what's unique about this world right now is manufacturers want to have these conversations. What's in it for them is people using their products and then being able to reinvest that, those dollars back into new innovation. So it's a world that's much different than some past complicating clinical classes that have been introduced, like GLP-1s and others, where there's a desire to stifle utilization or manage utilization in ways that kind of might create friction with manufacturers. I feel like in the cell and gene therapy space, specifically in the gene therapy space, again, we all really want the same thing. We just want it to be done in a fiduciary kind of thoughtful way. And I think participating in as many forums, as many events, and really trying to push the envelope in terms of strategies and vendors that you might be interested in talking to and working with, it all just makes us smarter. It all makes us more confident. It all makes us start to share ideas and thoughts and things that work and things that don't work. And then, when we put all that together, we can actually solve the problem, hopefully in a more proactive way. That way, whenever some of these therapies really start to hit across our country, we're a little bit more prepared. So I will build upon Christine's comments around data. I think those are the really key areas where we can learn and we can really approach this with a different lens.
Thank you so much. Sherry, just a minute.
Yeah, thanks. I would say that first and foremost, you need to make sure you know where you stand today, not only in your data, but in your contracts. What's covered in your TPA contract area, so your carrier, your plan design itself. What's covered in your PBM contract, carved in or out. What's covered, what about your consultant? Are they going to help you with this stuff? What about stop loss? Make sure you level set, know where you stand today. And then from an employer perspective, make sure you partner with trusted vendors or partners that can help you solve. They're going to come to the table and they got your back. They understand your population. They understand your risks or the risks in your industry and region, because you may not have the risk today, but maybe it's in your immediate region or industry, depending on your workforce. And then get educated and start taking action and be a part of the coalitions that can help, bring about change and collectively make a difference and prepare for that future that's coming.
And Mr. Denser.
So, I was listening very closely to Will and Christine, Travis, Sherry too, with regards to data. And if you don't know where to begin with the data, we need to set up what am I looking for? What am I trying to find? What is the cell and gene therapy 101 data collection? So that I don't have myself with my head in the sand. I'm actively looking at things and I know where to turn next. So I think that would be a starting point for many folks to know what data they're looking for and how to get it.
Great, thank you. And I'll end with Jason. And I ended with Jason on purpose because just enamored by what Caterpillar's been able to do and would love to see more of that happen. So Jason, any final words that we can bring this to a close, and we'll turn it back over to Cheryl.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, team. Good discussion today. I would say as an employer, be sure you're aware of what therapies are out on the market today and their cost. Look at the pipeline, understand what's coming in the pipeline. Look at your data, like I've heard come up several times, so you understand what the potential cost forecast may look like for these things. And then get started looking at the options in the market. As I mentioned, I'm looking for something that's comprehensive, that includes the value prop for the drug and how it compares to legacy therapies. Make sure you're paying for the right therapies. Understand the supply chain, the manufacturer discounts that may be available, either working with coalitions or organizations out there. Which COEs are going to administer, which I heard come up. Would you trust a hospital that's in a rural environment that's never done one before, or would you send people to a COE? I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to that, but it's something you should be asking your own leadership team at your companies. And I think these types of discussions are really good. And I think Midwest Business Group on Health is excellent at putting a playbook together to help you contemplate the things that we discussed today. So I'm really interested in hearing what Cheryl has to say to close this out here on maybe a playbook that could be helpful.
Yep. And I thank you all so much. Been a great conversation. Wonderful having you around the fire. Take a drink of coffee, have a drink of wine, whatever you're having, and I'll turn it back over to Cheryl. It's all yours, Cheryl.
Amazing, guys. I don't know if it was Travis or who said employers need to lead, not just react. Was that you, Travis? I think it was. Anyway, just thank you. Quick reminder. Let's go to the next slide. Last June, we launched a couple resources. The marketplace has moved so quickly. We had to redesign them. We had to edit them. We had to add new and different information. And it may be by our next June, we have our big employer event on pharmacy benefits, specialty drugs, and cell and gene therapy. We're going to have to update it then as well. But at the October 21st webinar, and if you're an MBGH member, you can listen in on that, or at least get some sort of a summary. I think, no, we do have recordings. We launched the employer snapshot. Today, we're launching again the employer action brief. It's been updated. It is managing cell and gene therapy for rare and orphan diseases. This is about real employers with real solutions. Next slide, please. And I think it's really important that both of these resources include the spreadsheet or the matrix that we've created of the models that we have identified that are out there. So it's critical, especially for you experts out there, if you're aware of other models, let us know. We're trying to bring the best of the best to the table. They're still in their early stages. But if we don't start sharing these with you for you to ask the right questions of your point solution vendors, your PBMs, your carriers, whoever is involved in this process, we're missing the mark. So know that both of these resources have this model in them. Please share other ideas with us. You see the evaluation link in there. And let me start with the most amazing experts that, again, were on this panel. Cannot thank you enough. I want to thank you, Tom. You are so knowledgeable in this space, and I'm grateful that I get to work with you on this. We are thinking, I'm pretty sure we've been working on a cell and gene therapy survey for employers for months. And we were ready to launch it. And I said, let's wait until January when the holidays are over. We want to include it to all of our sister coalitions as well. And Christine and Travis and Will and all of you, we're going to ask you what your opinions are about it. It's a tough nut to crack. And we're trying to capture information from all employers, whether they think they're covering them or not. Because understanding where the employer is coming from and all these key areas is important to us. And then those that maybe have had one claim, we want to find more information out that. So if you guys are willing, we'll send you that information soon and you can react to it. In January, we'll get that out. I just want to wish everyone over the next few months health and happiness and maybe some time off. I know I'll be taking a little time off. And I, again, want to thank our wonderful panel today for doing such a great job. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.